I'll tell you when we're good to go. Okay, Sean, we're now live.
Okay, thank you, and welcome everybody to the first meeting of 2023 of the Pension Board. Apologies of the first item.
We have apologies from Councillor Stephen Hurst and from Colin Williams.
Thank you. Matthew, I don't think I know Nigel.
Oh,
yes.
Thank you, Sean. Yeah, I was going to get to that one, but you first got to me, and apologies I didn't let you know before. Morning, everyone. Want to introduce you to Nigel Gabb, who has joined the team as Pension Investment and Accounting Manager. So it's a warm welcome from me to Nigel into the team to work with me. You will come across Nigel a lot more in the future, hopefully, as he moves into the role. So Nigel, I don't know if you could give us a quick 30 seconds, if you can, of your background for the members of the board.
Good morning, all. Yeah, as Matthew said, I joined the team in November from within the County Council. So I've worked with the County Council for some considerable time within the finance, and before that was within the Property Services Department. Yeah, looking forward to getting more involved with the pension fund and managing the investments and obviously making sure that we're keeping up with all the regulatory requirements on accounting and indeed transparency and on investments and that sort of stuff. So pleased to meet you all.
Thank you and welcome. Are there any new declarations of interest that anyone needs to make?
If I may, Sean, just on that one, after the meeting and before the next meeting, I will be issuing out the annual update, so we can record those conflicts from an annual basis. So what I will do is obviously provide you with your previous one and then move through, and therefore, that will come through for the next meeting. So just a kind of heads up, you'll get an email from me shortly with regard to the annual update of your conflicts of interest.
Okay, thank you. Minutes of our last meeting held in October. Does anybody have any matters of accuracy that they want to correct? There's only 6 pages, so I'll take them as a whole. I can't see a hand up, so are there any other matters arising that aren't on the agenda elsewhere?
I don't believe so. I think the areas of around cash flow are included in the papers this time.
Thank you. Which takes us then on to the committee minutes. We're simply asked to note the committee minutes. Is there anything that anybody wanted to raise from the committee minutes? No. Okay, in that case, Matthew, takes us on to your quarterly update report, which is slightly longer than 6.
Yeah.
We've all read them.
Yeah. If I may, Chair, thank you very much. So again, this is the quarterly report. This actually formed a major part of the last committee meeting as well. The backward look at the activities, what's been going on within the particular funds up to the quarter ending September. I know we're in January. We're always playing that little bit of catch up. Ultimately, these are the papers that went to the December committee meeting and contained a few issues. There is a lot within this, some on there. So if I may, Chair, what I might do is just take a few chunks at a time and then stop for any questions on those particular areas rather than go through absolutely everything, because it does cover a myriad of different information in there.
Yes, please, Matthew.
Yeah. So just kind of really kind of high level issues with that with our funding, the funding of the fund. We did exercise some caution with regard to the number. It is still extremely positive, or it was at the end of September. That ultimately we did provide the funding level. That is now being based upon the new proposed assumptions of 2022, which will be formally adopted in the March committee meeting and come back at the end of that valuation process. There was obviously some caution around that in terms of what was going on within the markets towards the end of September as well, which actually did artificially manoeuvre that. So what the actuary was very keen on was to make sure no investment made decisions were being based upon the information that was being provided at that point due to the likelihood of that. But what it is reflecting is that the overall funding position of the fund still remaining positive, even with the with the circumstances that we're being faced within there. So obviously investment performance over the quarter was still negative. It was a negative quarter, down 1.3%, but within the environment that we've been actually facing, it's still reasonable. That was above the old strategic benchmark. So what we call the strategic benchmark and what we monitor against is actually the asset allocation of the fund. And when a decision is made to change the asset allocation, obviously you can't always just maneuver that to that new asset allocation immediately. So what we do is that we actually try and effectively have the strategic benchmark reflective of what is actually going on within the investment. So the strategic benchmark hadn't moved to the previous alignment of the asset allocation. We are now in the process of moving that to the later strategic benchmark. So it will be a more accurate reflection of where that is over time. But over the 3 years, we're still on benchmark of that 3.6, which isn't that reflective, with the AUM obviously slightly below that £3 billion. I'll stop there at that point and see if there's any questions around funding the liabilities or the investment performance as was. But before I do that, just to say, Sean, within the papers as well was the first iteration of the performance reporting, the new performance reporting provided by Brunel. So that went back to committee for feedback. I didn't receive any feedback from committee. I'm more than happy to receive feedback from the local pensions board as well, if there is actually things that you think are missing. We will carry on developing this reporting as we move forward. So we will look to enhance this as we move forward. What this did do at the previous committee, if you recall, normally within the papers, I put a performance table in. The committee have asked that I still provide that to them in the future, which was what I was providing before we came back to this report. So there will be further information that will be provided on that side. So yeah, hopefully anything that's key from there. And then the last thing, really, just to wrap up on this particular outing, was in that strategic asset allocation. We are now within target on equities, and ultimately we were previously high. Ultimately, with the movement in the markets, has made that we've come back within that target. We were looking at an underweight position of fixed interest, but we will cover that a little bit later with what the changes are on the investment strategy statement, which will now bring that back into that particular range moving forward on that side. So at that point, sorry, John, I will stop this time on that one.
You got a question from John Topping.
Oh yeah, sorry, Matthew. It might be a very stupid question. So I can see the reduction in the value of the assets, but there's a significant increase in reduction in the liabilities. I know the report says that 10.1, I think, is 10.1, so that's what we said to go up 5% in. But that reduction in the liabilities is still, even that 5% increase won't put it anywhere near back in. So why has there been a marked increase of the liabilities in comparison to the asset value? It really is a significant drop of the liability, isn't it? And obviously that means that the fund would still be 135-ish% funded at that point in time. Am I getting that wrong? Am I look at the numbers?
It's linked to the gilt yield and what's happened within the gilt market. So obviously the liabilities are valued on those gilt, on the risk-free rate on the gilt yield, and with that, with what's happened within gilt yields that have been kind of basically zero for a long period of time, now up and around that 4% level, it has that material change on there. Now, whether those gilt yields remain at that level, and I think that's what the actuary was was coming forward with caution at this point because of the volatility that we've actually seen within that long-term gilt yield that drives then the valuation of your liabilities. So that's where they're advocating caution over those numbers over the longer term of where we are within that gilt yield. So that's what's been driving that. Yes, the assets have dropped, but the liability value has dropped a lot larger because of the way that they value it in relation to that gilt yield.
Yeah, that's fine. I just suppose it's a 30% drop in liability, isn't it, against a. My brain's not quick enough to work out what the drop on the active value is, but I suppose it is a significant, and I understand the gilt yield, etc. But it is a significant increase in that. I don't know. Sean, I'm going to ask you: is there a similar sort of effect at Oxfordshire out of interest?
Yes, I think we don't present the figures in that way. I don't think so. We haven't had such a stark.
So I didn't want to put you on the spot.
But yeah, I was looking at a report from the actuary yesterday on a particular scheme employer, and where they're close to cessation, and the change in gilt yields has been dramatic. In terms of their liabilities, in terms of what their cessation would be. They've gone from a position where they would owe us a considerable amount of money to being in surplus, simply because the gilt yields have changed so much over the last few months. So yeah, those sorts of figures don't surprise me.
Yeah, and we've seen very similar in that as well. So certainly as part of the valuation process that we can touch on in a moment, we're having that dialogue with some of those employers that may be looking or moving towards exit, and whether or not that escalates in relation to their positionings at this moment in time as well.
But you'll have that conversation later on the agenda, Matthew.
Yeah, well, it comes down into what we do in a minute when we talk about where we are with the valuation and exit inside. On that. Are there any more questions on where we are with funding and investment? End of September, the new one shortly. I'll move on then onto page 19 of the papers, just to cover off the TCFD response. So we did put together a response to the TCFD consultation. That was active till the end of November, 24th of November. So the fund did provide a response to that consultation. On the whole, it was positive in terms of what we were putting through. There was just some caveats around that we talked about previously around certainly some of the timing and maybe aligning it with the valuation process in terms of the reporting and other aspects along there, which seems the most practical thing. We are expecting at some point, in around April, May, the further response to that consultation to come from government. So we will keep yourselves appraised of what that is and what that looks like moving forward. Obviously, we also held the RI workshop day, and thank you to everyone who attended. I hope you found that a useful exercise and actually really worthwhile. That in itself is we're taking that work that we've done with Mercer through and the views that were expressed on that particular day, and that's starting to formulate the responsible investment strategy. We are doing some work, an analysis of where the fund was positioned in 2019 and the effects of the decisions that have already been taken with regard to the move towards net zero and the commitment date of 2050. I am envisaging hopefully running another half day with the board and committee in hopefully in around May time to actually then move that further forward to the fruition of a responsible investment policy and a formal responsible investment policy for the fund. So yeah, there is still further work to do, and what that will do is obviously lead in again into future updates of the investment strategy statement and the communications policy and so on that side. So again, what I will do, Sean, is just stop there and any questions with regard to those two or any feedback or observations. Thank you.
I can't see a hand up, Matthew, so I will ask a question. And I know a number of funds have produced TCFD reports in advance of the regulations. What is Gloucestershire's position on producing their first TCFD report?
At the moment, I would say it is something that we are going to be reviewing with Nigel's introduction into the team. It gives us additional resource to be able to look at that. We are, myself and Nigel and the team, we are looking at the business plan for next year. So it will depend upon certainly some of the future activities and whether or not we've got the capacity to actually deal with that at this moment in time. So I'm not going to give a firm commitment. What I will say is obviously when it becomes a regulatory requirement, it will be provided within that. It would be a hope that we would be able to do it earlier, but it will depend upon where we are with other activity. We've still got outturns, as you'll see later, from the governance review, administration and other issues that we actually need to then balance within that to see if we can actually have the right resources to that. So what I will do is make a firm commitment that it will be provided by the time it needs to under the regulations. Whether or not we're in a position to do that earlier, it would be an aspiration for us to do that, I think, at this point. But we're working into whether or not we'll be able to balance that in with the other draws on the resources that we have.
On Oxfordshire, we're in the process of seeking to increase our establishment on the responsible investment side because of all the additional work. So I suppose my question is, therefore, has Gloucestershire got sufficient resources to meet all the new requirements, including TCFD? Is this something you're not yet? You need Nigel to have a bit more time to get his feet under the table. Be clear about.
It's not something that we fully evaluated yet, whether or not we have all of the required resources, or whether we'll need to come back for further resourcing with all of the additional regulation that's coming through. Not within TCFD, we're expecting further guidance on pooling, levelling up, and all of those aspects, and how does that affect the team. So we are ongoing analysing the resourcing requirements of the team to be able to deliver that. So that's not. I'm not sure where. I don't want to commit to whether we've got the right level of resource or whether we'll need more, should we say, at this point in time. That analysis is yet to be done.
Okay, thank you.
It's nice to know you're getting additional resource, Sean. We've
got to find it first.
Yeah, we'll come to that one in a moment. Yeah.
Any other questions on the RI piece? No. I think again, then we're happy for you to move on, then, Matthew.
Okay, thank you. So moving actually on to fund administration, then. You may recall at the last meeting, the committee had expressed concern around the performance around the key performance indicators, and asked for some analysis to be done and a plan to brought back with regard to how we were going to address the performance around those key performance indicators moving forward. So on page 20 of your reports, and then I think one of the appendices actually gives the full details in terms of the KPIs. If you actually look at the numbers on there, I think that's page 77 of your packs that those numbers actually start from. So what we have seen in the quarter at the end of September is an improvement in the KPIs. Obviously, they're compounding from that side. So the quarterly performance was actually above those particular numbers, but they're still not operating to target where we see. But we are seeing improvement within that. The mantra of the team still remains the same, that we are trying to achieve a level performance for all members. So what we don't do is, once somebody's case has gone beyond the KPI date, put that to one side and deal with cases that we can get within the KPI date. We provide that as a level service. So as you can see in brackets, we talk about the average days taken, that you can actually see where those are actually sat in comparison to the KPI of the 15 days in terms of the average cases taken of all of those cases, which I think is one of those key metrics. one of the things that we did and was determined when we actually came in a bit further to it, and what I was concerned about was whether or not we were actually measuring the right things within those KPIs as well. So I think that what we do need to do is go back to a fundamental to actually ask ourselves within that administration strategy that we had, are we actually measuring the right KPIs, those key performance indicators within the activity and the work of the team? And I think for me, there's a lot of activity within the team that is not being reflected within these KPIs and these metrics. So what we have done as part of the overall governance review, one of the activities on the governance review was to review the administration strategy, and that includes things like the KPIs and the reportables on that. So what we have done, if you remember, we were utilising and working closely with Aon as a partner around that governance review, is to escalate that part of the governance review work a bit further forward. So within your papers, there is a paper there and a scope of the work that Aon are going to be undertaking to review the administration. They will be reviewing the structure, the efficiency, and the reportable KPIs. We will be looking at what we are measuring, how we can measure it. Now, that might mean that's a reliance on IT and the pensions administration software and others. We may or may not be able to record all of that, but if not, how can we put a plan in or we will put a plan in place then to actually be able to measure those aspects going forward. So there's what this has actually triggered is potentially a little bit more of a fundamental review of all of the aspects within the administration team as part of that work on the administration strategy, and actually escalated that further forward. What that means is that the work's ongoing at the moment. We should be taking a draft or an update report back to the March committee, and I'm envisaging the out-term report from the work from Aon going back to the June committee. Now, what that also then works alongside is the involvement of the new pensions administration manager. As I advised, I think previously, Alan Marshall, who may be known to a lot of you, who's worked in the council for a long time, has taken flexible retirement. He's moved into a group pension lead role and a kind of a project management role, working with me within the team on lower days per week on that side. Pleased to announce that we have managed to secure a replacement for Alan. If you can say anyone can actually replace Alan, a new pensions administration manager, and a gentleman by the name of Andy Cunningham will be joining us. He comes with experience. He's working with Wiltshire at this moment in time on their manager, and he will be joining us with effect from the 1st of March. So also as part of that process, it will allow Andy to come in with his views and actually be able to input into this administration strategy. Ultimately, because it will take a large degree of leadership in terms of the delivery of that strategy within the team moving forward. So I think that is appropriate on there. In terms of recruitment, we are still recruiting to that original resourcing plan, which I brought back to committee and was agreed back in 2021. But we're, I think, out for the 3rd or 4th iteration of our pensions officers. I think interviews are lined and scheduled for next week on there. We're hopeful that we actually had a much larger response to the advert than we've had previously on the last 2 or 3 iterations of it. So it would be nice that we can bring that to a conclusion at this point in terms of those officers. And that would then we would see I think addition of about 7 new members of the team that will be in there. Obviously, onboarding new members of the staff in the environment that we have is quite technical. So what we have done is utilised some work with Hymans and a training plan. So there's a 12-step training plan that is being delivered to onboard those new members of the team. But we're also rolling that out to the existing members of the team as well. And Nigel and people within the finance and accounting team are also involved in aspects of that training. We've also provided a technical support help desk through Hymans as well to allow members of the team to be able to access some technical expertise rather than just reliance of one individual within our team moving forward. So we're trying to build that resilience as we operate across there. In terms of actually the major operations when we look at the major operations. Benefit statements were produced to the statutory timeframes. We've produced the annual allowance information on, to schedule, on time, within there. The valuation process has been completed, and the valuation plan itself is ahead of schedule on there, and the response we had in terms of our data was clean. So in terms of what we are actually doing on the fundamentals is still there, it's still robust, it's still very key. What we're looking forward is actually how do we future-proof now that team moving forward and those reportable KPIs. So there's a lot of focus that's going on that particular area at this moment. I'll stop there again, Sean, for any questions on this. Overall.
Okay, I think there's quite a lot in that, Matthew. People have questions on any aspect of the administration, including the performance statistics on page 77.
Or a board comfortable with the course of actions that are being taken to address the circumstances that we face at this moment.
No one else has got a question, Matthew. I'll ask you a question.
Thank you, George.
Just looking at the stats on page 77. In Oxfordshire, we try and prioritise retirements, lump sums and death grants, because that's where we're making a payment out to an individual. Those are the stats that appear to be the lowest on if I'm reading page 77 correctly. Retirements at 38% in target and death grants 33%, and both of them have reduced since last year. So it's just a question really, do you have the same priorities as us, or is there an issue with retirements, lump sums and death grants given the low levels of hitting deadlines?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Sean. I think the answer is yes. Obviously, at the point where we had the valuation process in the first quarter of the year, we had to, as we were then onboarding the year-end process, there was a view that we had to obviously hit deadlines in the production of the overall data for the actual valuation process. So there was a redeployment of the limited resources we had in certain areas, but we did focus then on retirements, death grants being paid up until that point. The reality, I think, a little bit of it is actually the way that we process is more of the issue than the actual reality of it, and it goes back to the process being still very much a paper-based exercise, and with the advent of the COVID versus then into agile working process that still it had within the team, actually alludes for the way that process happened. So as an example, I'll just give you an example. The team was still maintaining since COVID, a working practice of 1 week in, 1 week out to allow for the agile working within the parameters of the council moving forward. So we have a turnaround deadline of 8 days to pay a death grant. So if somebody takes that case home, processes it on a Monday, and they're not back in the office until the following Monday, it's tracking that time period until they can then come back with that paperwork to the office, hand it on to the next person to make the next thing. So a lot of it is actually just how can we become more agile? So this is the one thing that we're looking at. So it's about processes, about IT, and it's about everything that will actually speed and actually process that data. If you want, obviously, my opinion around that, what we're also just tracking through these KPIs is the point that we can actually make the payment. So if we track death grants as a for instance, at the point when the decision is made who should get that death grant, we are tracking whether or not we pay that within 8 days. Now, that case may have actually taken 2 years to actually get to that decision point, but we're not tracking or reporting that at this moment in time, which I think is not a reflection of actually the activity of the work. As Sean will also allude to as well, not every case where a member dies results in a lump sum payment being made, but you might still need to set up a widow or widower's pension and so on. So we're not tracking, and there's no evidence of all of that activity that's been going on, or the levels of activity around those caseloads as well. So this is very, very, very much, these KPIs are very much a small snapshot in time and I'm not sure they're reflective of the activity of the team, or actually are a meaningful measure for committee or board to actually assess the overall performance of the team, because you're actually only measuring one small part of a process of somebody's retirement case moving forward. So I think that there are limitations, but what I will say is that our focus is on those cases where we are making those payments in terms of retirements and death grants. So back to your original point, Sean.
One thing I haven't spotted in all the papers is, do you report numbers of complaints? Because that's another measure of how well you're doing. There's a lot of people who aren't getting their pension within timescale. Then I'd expect a lot of complaints.
Yeah. So obviously, what we do have is the formal complaints process, the IDRP process that goes through. And I'm pleased to say that we don't receive IDRP complaints on the basis of the time taken to actually make complaints. So we don't have any formally logged internal disputes procedures on the payment of benefits. We do, from a corporate perspective, our activity, there is a complaints department at the council where if there was any complaints around a pensions team, it would be recorded at that particular point as well. I'm actually pleased to say that we don't receive many complaints. We receive more compliments from people than we do complaints, in terms of that. We are very upfront in terms of what we tell people within the correspondence that they get. So we try and manage those expectations moving forward. Is it an expectation that is realistic? I think we would all like to make sure that we are delivering a level of service that we believe is the right level of service to be delivering. Would I prefer that we had a slightly better expectation turnaround time when we talk to our membership? Yes. But we actually need to make sure that we've actually got the ability to be able to provide that. So I think that what we are looking at is the investment into the IT to allow us to actually be able to do that in a more efficient manner moving forward.
The complaint numbers, you don't include them in the reports of committee?
I don't include them in the reports at the moment. I can look to do that, Sean, if the board would like that.
A bit more context around these. If that is not leading to, even in the informal complaints, then sometimes it looks like those figures suggest a very poor performance, 38%, 33%. But actually, if there's very little complaint,
yeah, and I think that, and I would say that you're really testament to the team, because what they do try and do is provide that level service. So what we are talking about is that, potentially if you look at some of those numbers, you're missing that 15-day target by a day or two, rather than it being 20, 30, 40 days over, which would then lead to what you're saying there, Sean, those complaints. I think that's because of the approach that we take, where we deliver that. We try and make sure that everybody gets a level service. It's okay, that service isn't to the level that the aspiration that we want to provide at the moment, but what it's not doing is leading to those complaints, because we try and treat every retiree equally moving forward.
Okay. I'll shut up and let Annette ask her a question.
Hi, I guess my query is around risks, because you've said about the agile working, it's all paper-based. People are working 1 week in the office, 1 week out. So my vision is there's a lot of paperwork that's being transferred from the office to the employee's home. Is that introducing GDPR risk, and how is that being managed? Have you experienced any loss of data, I guess, or complaints from people to say that their forms have been lost, or there's been delays because you've misplaced it?
No, we haven't had any issues with regard to that. A lot of it is actually obviously just the information that's what tends to happen is, at the moment, the one thing that we have changed already is the agile working now. So they still have the ability to work in one week in, 1 week out.
Yeah.
We're now operating within the the administration team are 5 days in the office per fortnight. So it's they could, and what's tending to happen now, where people are coming in and out a little bit more often rather than 5 days in, 5 days out. But it gives them that flexibility. So we are seeing that change around. What's tending to happen is rather than then, they don't print the material at home. So when they run the calculations, they run the paperwork, it's then being stored up and then they print it while they're in the office. So there isn't that movement of data around. It's more about how that then gets printed. They then get to acknowledge it, sign it, send it, and then move it on to the next process. So I think that's really been the stumbling block. What we could have done was maybe look at trying to get resource of someone in to print things and then move it on to the next. But then that's when you would have actually had that move through. So all the checking and the paperwork remains in the office.
Right, okay.
But it's actually the person doing it, saving it, and then when they come in, they then produce all of the work that they've done the previous week, or that's what they were doing, producing it the previous week, which was then creating the delay. So there wasn't the GDPR issues and risks of loss of data and everything else. It remained in the office environment.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions on any aspect of the administration work that Matthew's been talking about?
Not from me, no.
No. Where do you want to move us on to next then, Matthew?
I'll move on to the other few bits just quite quickly, if I take them in order. So business plan, operating mainly to target on the business.
Go on, because I'm stuck on page 77 still.
So if you go back to page 22 of your covering report, if I look at that one.
That's what, thank you.
Sure. So yeah, business plan operated mainly to target. As agreed there, the only two real items was around the audit. And we'll come on to that one in a moment. Still stays on, but our audit has been completed, but because it forms part of the council's accounts, we have to wait for the formal sign off from the council to actually then formally have our audit process done. But we have got the audit findings report in there. But ultimately, from the business plan that was in the budget and business plan from the last year, everything else is operating to target. In terms of the core projects, we've got obviously the actuarial valuation and the associated tasks. That's on track. I think we've communicated with all employers apart from 2 at the moment, which are being communicated with this week, and that was really as a result of their data issues, and we had to resolve some of the data issues with them before we could actually then provide them with their meaningful results. So we've been in communication with all employers now. We've had the consultation on the funding strategy statement. So we are anticipating that the rates and adjustment certificate, the funding strategy statement, final valuation report will go to committee on the 2nd of March for full approval at that point in time. So I think a lot of hard work has gone into that, and I think the admin team with their limited resources, should be commended in terms of the data provision that we've gone through with that on that basis. The review of the pensions administration software contract, that is still ongoing. We are working through with that. I have a call later on this afternoon with legal on there. We're working with Hymans in terms of preparation of report, and we're anticipating that going through the cabinet process over the next few months with regard to sign off and where we are with that administration contract. In terms of pensions dashboard, yeah, we're still making some progress with that. Our software provider is doing some analysis for us at this moment in time around the data and how our data is looking in terms of the requirements for the pensions dashboard. And that will highlight how much work or not we might need to do to be ready for the pensions dashboard in terms of information. What we're also looking at then is the architecture of how we're going to link to that dashboard. Again, a lot of that will be done and undertaken by our software provider, and the anticipation is that we would use a software provider to actually connect to the architecture required. I think the pensions dashboard will remain on the business plan as a core project for next year, because one of the areas that we do need to look at is then how do we communicate ahead of the launch of the dashboard with our membership. So what we don't do is get a huge spike when the government actually launch pensions dashboard. we get a huge spike in communications on a membership when they've already got available the information to their hand on that side. And lastly, McLeod, we have had some new regulation come through and some new legislation come through. That's now allowed is each of the individual departments, and in our case, MHCLG, to go away and actually write then their regulations of how they're going to deal with McLeod moving forward. So yes, we have seen some progress in terms of the high level regulation, but what we haven't still got is the detail. But again, a lot of that will be captured by the IT. That the capability around the IT will be key for us moving forward with regard to that. So that's really the business plan and where we are with that. I'll stop there, Sean, see if there's any questions.
Okay. Any questions from anyone on business plan?
No. Okay.
No.
So governance review, we're coming hopefully towards the last few items towards the governance review. As we said, we still got a number of items still to look at. What we are escalating now, obviously, that was due to start a little bit later in 2023 was that fund admin strategy, which is what we just talked about. The communications policy is wrapped up with that as well, and hopefully a lot of input from Andy as the new the admin manager and within the team for that moving forward. And I think that was something that was key that came out from the workshop that we did as well with committee and board, is about actually how are we communicating the good work that is going on at this moment in time. So I think that is going to be critical moving forward. The investment strategy statement again has been kind of brought forward a little bit early. We've got through that work a little bit earlier, and we'll come to that a bit later on there. The items that are remaining are more around in the future about the identity of the fund, actually and building and developing website and that communication. So it'll all come out from that communications moving forward, I think, is the aspects that's left on the governance review. I'll just rattle through into knowledge and skills assessment. Thank you to everyone who undertook the national knowledge assessment that was run by Hymans. I'm awaiting the results from them at this moment in time. As soon as I have that, I will obviously circulate those round, and they will be included in the committee and board because it will help form the training strategy for the next year on there and areas, and hopefully reflects the areas of the training that we've provided in terms of that uptick moving forward. So I'll stop there at that point, Sean, if there's any questions on the governance and the knowledge and skills. No.
Do you know how many people undertook the assessment, both on the committee and on the board?
Yeah, there were 5 committee members and 5 board members.
5 committee members out of how many, sorry?
Testing my brain now. Is it? Can you help me? Is it 10?
Hang on, I'll just check. I think isn't it 9?
2, 3, 4, 7, 8. I think there's 10 with the inclusion of Julia, but she was only just appointed into her role as an employer rep on that committee. So I'd say 9 at that point. Obviously now 10. Am I right?
So only 50% engagement amongst the committee, higher amongst the board.
Yes. And that will be reflected in the official report that you'll receive, that percentage of completion by both parties.
Okay, thank you. And did you say we'll have the results of that for our next meeting?
I will be hopeful. Yes, I chased Hymans. Yes, I know Hymans are launching the results globally today. I think there's actually a online webinar about it going on as we speak, which I've applied for, so I can actually review the recording of it, and then we should be getting our individual fund results out the back of that as well.
Okay, thank you.
yes, I would be hopeful they will be with you by the next meeting, because I'm hoping to utilise that within the business plan and the training plan cycle for next year.
Any other questions on governance or the knowledge assessment? No, I think we can move on again then, Matthew.
Okay, thank you. So last two items is around the audit and the annual report. So I put the audit findings report for board members in your pack. Starts on page 99 to 133. Very much from a highlight. We are receiving an unqualified opinion on the draft on the accounts from there. So I think the only real major items that were picked up was around the use of the internal accounting system. So actually areas outside of our control of which we can actually rectify. It's to do with the accounting systems and the functions that we use and the controls around that. That is being rectified by the council. There is a strategy plan. They are onboarding a new system. And I believe that by the end of this year, 2023, that new system will be onboarded. So it will more than likely, those same issues will be highlighted on the next audit report. So it will be on I think it was on last year's audit report. It's on this year's. It will be on next year's, but then the year after, it will be anticipated that those control issues will be resolved by the onboarding of a new system and a new SAP system to actually allow for that to actually take place. But outside of that, the audit has been completed. It is going to provide an unqualified opinion. There were a few of more minor issues that they picked up around the way that we were wording things, but they are not significant. They haven't had that in the past. We had a new audit team with us this time, and they were just saying we would recommend you change this word to this on a few of those occasions. But we have stayed true, obviously following the SIP for guidance in terms of the way that we produce that. As an outturn, obviously, as you know, with the annual report, we have to publish the annual report on or before the 1st of December. We would always like to publish our annual report with our audit findings and our statutory accounts. We were unable to do that, but we still published our annual report with a covering statement with the draft accounts. Once those accounts are signed off, which I believe might be Friday.
Yes.
Sorry, Matthew. There's an audit and governance committee on Friday. So the intention is that the committee will be asked to approve those accounts, both for the pension fund and for the council. But it is the audit is ongoing for the council. There's still a few things that are being finished off. The pension fund is finished, so that's the assurance that we can give for that. But we're anticipating an unqualified position to be granted by Grant Thornton, and possibly a week after the committee. But the committee will be asked to approve the accounts.
And then once that's done, we will republish the annual report online with the final accounts and the audit opinion within our annual report as well. So we will update that annual report, and that's when we will then circulate that annual report to all the employers as well.
Question from John.
Yeah, sorry, just stupid question number 2 of the morning for you, Matthew. On those follow-up from prior year recommendations talking about a system change, we'll sort them out. But in terms of manual journals with no detail, I'm just trying to understand how a system change would fix that. And Michael knows my love of manual journals and no detail. So why would a system change fix journals with no detail? Surely you need to have detail in any journal, whether it's on SAP or whatever system you're using or moving to. So I'm just trying to understand why that's not an issue which could have been resolved whatever system you're using.
Do you want me to answer that, Matthew?
Yeah, go for it.
So I think that what we were trying to do was make all the fields mandatory. So while it says manual, there clearly someone is processing a journal on the system. So what we were trying to do was to make sure that the narrative field that enables, processes the journal and gives the indication of what it relates to is actually mandatory. Now, I believe that wasn't the case, hence why we had blank fields in, and that got picked up within the audit. I mean, there are very few of them, but nevertheless, that's the system improvement that we were trying to introduce, and that I'm not aware of what the current position is with that, but certainly that's something that we would want to do with the existing system and not necessarily have to wait. But there is an internal process to checking in what the journals, and I believe there's a workaround whereby people can go back in and actually update those blank fields anyway now. So we're trying to avoid that at all costs. So.
I mean, I suppose it's just, these things are both carried forward, and segregation and duty, so many people doing X, Y, and Z, and obviously SAP is a very complicated system, so that's probably why. But it is just a wonder as to, it is a long time, isn't it, if it's been called for, and you're saying it's going to be in a next year's report as well. I think you were saying, Matthew, is that right? So it's, it's a ongoer.
Yeah, I think it is anticipated, from what I understand, that the issues won't be resolved until we get the new generation of the software. And correct me if I'm wrong, Nigel, I think that the ones that go in that don't have the narrative are ones that are automatically generated off the back of payroll runs and things. It's not the manual ones that are going in. We haven't had any manual ones that have gone through as a team without any narrative on them.
Yeah, I think that you're right. I think the majority, they're like payment, because some of our contractual arrangements, they do like Excel upload feed payment runs, and so some of those have not had the narrative fields in within them.
I'll shut up now. That's fine.
Let's go.
Yeah, Annette.
Yeah, it was just your comment that you're able to go back into the system and amend those that have got blank descriptions. Is that not introducing a risk in itself? If a journal's been posted, you should not have the ability to go back in and edit that journal or amend that journal.
You're quite right. What we're amending is the narrative field. So there is an audit trail, obviously, to that, but we would not be amending the actual transaction itself. What we're saying is, if they're trying to improve the information that relates to that transaction rather than amend the actual journal.
I understand the purpose of that task. I just feel that that's a weakness, a control risk within the system. If you have the ability to go in there, because that just enhances the risk of fraudulent transactions, does it not?
Well, I don't know whether it would be fraudulent. I mean, the actual debits and credits, if you like, of the actual transaction cannot be amended. And clearly that is the element that would be the most secure element. I think you've acknowledged the point that this needs to be addressed within the system going forward, and that's been incorporated and embedded within the new SAP replacement system. So we would hope that this is only a temporary.
So it sounds like there's a training issue there, isn't there? I think this is a common recommendation and issue that is identified with journal posting. So it just sounds like there's a training issue there. Maybe undertake some spot checks on a regular basis if you're unable to authorise every single transaction.
Yeah, I mean, from obviously, the county council is a huge organisation. So many people that are using the system, controls within it need to be embedded, and that's why we're trying to make sure that the system itself makes fields mandatory and enforces people to actually put the correct information at source. With regard to the pension fund, then obviously we will make everything we do undertake checks to make sure that the information that we're processing, obviously we're the nature of pension fund transactions are a lot more controlled because there's only a few of us that within the team that are undertaking that. So can give that assurance to the board that the pension fund issues are less likely to be an impact. Whereas the County Council, we've got such a volume of transactions going through, then that's more difficult to control.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Any other questions on this? No.
I think that wraps up the.
And I think we were just asked to note all of that. We've had a good conversation about most of it.
It's on page 26. I think was the.
People are happy to take the recommendation on page 26.
Yeah, happy to take the recommendation.
Noted. Thank you. So I think takes us to the risk register.
Yeah, thank you. Sure, that starts on page 135. It's a long audit findings report. That's why it starts on page 135. Yeah, hopefully a quick report. Obviously, this comes back every quarter to committee and board to review the risk register. Since the previous review that's taken place, there are no changes to the existing or the previous risk register from the previous quarter. We do have still some elevated risks that are there and outside of their intended target, mainly in relation to recruitment and the impact of the COVID-19 aspect and what that's actually done in terms of recruitment, resourcing and everything else that moves through. The other aspects and the other risks that are highlighting are still there. So the knowledge and skills, and that was one that was done at the request to leave it for a period of time until that a plan had actually been delivered around that knowledge and skills. So it might be one that we're ever chasing in terms of that elevated risk and allow from that particular side. So apart from that, I will leave it for any questions, Sean.
Okay, questions on any aspect of the risk register or any of the risks contained within it? No questions on the risk register? Okay.
I think there was a recommendation on page 137 that the board notes the risk register and the current elevated risks as outlined in the report.
People happy to accept that recommendation?
Yep, that's fine.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think that then takes us to the exempt session.
Sorry, Sean, can I just get you to read the text for agenda item? The recording. The board are in agreement to exclude the press and public.
Yep. That in accordance with section 100A brackets 4 Act 1972, the public be excluded from the meeting for the following agenda items, because it is likely that if members of the public were present, there would be disclosure to them of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3 of part 1 of schedule 12A to the Act, and the public interest in withholding information outweighs the public interest in disclosing information to the public.
Okay, are you all in agreement? Can I have a nod, show of hands?
Yep.
Thank you. Okay, can you just bear with me a second whilst I pause the recording? Thank you.